In this lesson, we'll take a look at painting textures for different channels. So in addition to the color channel, we can also paint textures for different channels for this. So things like the specularity, the shininess of this character, we can start to adjust that. So let's go into, we're going to be using the paintbrush, but I'm going to create a new layer. And this time we'll call this something like body spec. We'll keep it the same size, and we'll choose for the channel to drive the specularity. So now it's going to create a new group with a new paint layer inside of it called body spec. Now we need a starting point, just as we did with the color. And so we can choose to make it take away all the specularity and then add to it. In that case, we would choose black. So for this map, we're going to be painting black and white. Okay, because I don't want to have a colored spec. And so the black will be no spec, and the white would be full specularity. We'll probably be down here in this range somewhere for the most part. And so what we can do is just reduce that way down, and then let's fill that layer. So we'll go flood paint layer, and you can see how that darkens everything up because we've taken all that specularity away. So now what we would do is go back in with our paintbrush. We can use one of these stamps, and I want to get a lighter gray. And now I can come in and I can start to add in specularity. So across his head, start to add a little bit of that specularity back in. Okay, and if it's overall too dark, you could go ahead and flood that with something that's a little bit lighter. Okay, and that will provide you with a better starting point maybe. But you can come in here and start to paint across this. Okay. Now some areas we may want to be shinier, and so we can make that a lighter color. And the lighter color will be more specular. Now think about this, we want the more specular pieces of this, or the shinier pieces, probably maybe around the eyes. So let me actually get a much lighter color. I'm going to take this stamp away and just kind of draw in or paint in this speck around the eyes so that it's a little bit shinier here. Maybe also around the nose, and the mouth will be a little bit shinier. Okay. Now we can go back and adjust our material, and under the gloss, if we want it to be consistently glossy, we can go ahead and just set that as a color, or we could actually paint a map for that glossiness so that it's glossier in certain areas. But you can see how that kind of changes things a little bit. Okay, and we can come back in on our spec map and kind of break things up a little bit. And so you just want to come in and it really just adds a lot to our texture just by having the specular broken up instead of having one consistent specularity across the surface. It really helps to have that specularity broken up a bit. Okay, so we can come in here. Maybe the feet and hands are maybe a little bit more specular. Maybe the palms of the hands are even more specular. So we can start to paint in through there. Kind of paint in the back. And we have that point light that's generating negative light, so getting a little bit of oddness here. We just need to move that in position, and when he gets in position it'll look a little bit better. But we can come in here and sort of drive our specular up a little bit. Get kind of a larger brush size, and you can dial in the strength if you don't want it to affect be such a large effect. And so we can come in here and make his head a little bit shinier. Okay, the ears, we would probably want to be a bit shinier as well. So I'll take that stamp off, kind of a brighter, and let's paint inside of the ears here. All right, so just kind of brings it to life a little bit more just by painting in some spec. Okay, we can also add some bump to the mix. So we could come in here, choose bump map as we create a new layer. And this would be maybe for detail that's too small to include in the sculpt, but we can include in the bump map. So I would get kind of a medium gray you can go into numeric input if you want to get it kind of exactly. And we could just come in here and get a gray and fill that bump, flood it with gray. And then any areas that we want to be raised up, we would choose kind of a lighter color. Again, go to our paintbrush. We can choose any sort of stamp that we want. And you can see how that's creating that extra little bump on the surface. And so, you know, up on the lips here where we don't have a lot of bump, we could add a little bit of bump there. On the chin, coming in maybe along the body, adding a little bit of bump across the surface. Just adds that extra little bit of detail in there. And you can dial this in. It's starting to look kind of bruised in there, so I'll probably go back in and tweak that texture a little bit, but I think the head looks pretty good as far as what we want to do. Okay, we can also add incandescence. So incandescence is sort of that glow that we looked at. So let's create an incandescence map. And so I'm going to go ahead and choose incandescence for the channel. And for the incandescence, we want to be very subtle with this. We don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to actually choose black as the default and flood that layer with black so that it's not incandescent at all. And then we can go ahead and add that incandescence back in. All right, so I'm going to turn off the stamp, and I want to choose a red, but a really dark red. Okay, so something like that. And it's going to be probably overdone here, but we do have the ability to control this based on the layer. So now if I come in and paint, for instance, around the eyes, you can see it starts to bring a little bit of life to it. It starts to glow a little bit. You can come in here and add a little bit of incandescence. And it's almost like a subsurface kind of an effect. Or we can come in and add a little bit of a glow to certain areas in here. Okay, we can be very subtle with it. I'm going to come in here. And if you want to, you know, you could, if you think, well, I want to have a little bit across the entire surface, you could come in and flood again to create a little bit of that lifelike glow in there, kind of what we had before, and then add on top of that. So come back in here and add on top of it so that there's even a little bit more in these areas. Kind of flesh it out a little bit. Again, we're not touching the color, it's the incandescence of it. So it's kind of emitting its own light. And so we can come in here in certain areas and just add a little bit of that. If you need to erase it back out, you can always go back in, use your paint erase to erase that back out. All right, and let's go back and just redo the ears a little bit again. Get kind of a larger brush. It just makes it look brings a little bit more life to it. Makes it look a little bit more lifelike. All right, bring a little bit more into there. So something like that. Now we can go in and fix up this texture. I also want to make sure that I create a diffuse map, or in the base color, I paint in the claws. And so I could go in and choose kind of a brown color as a base. Choose a paintbrush, and then come in and paint those. So get kind of a smaller brush. And then you could come in and start to paint those claws out. So you could either create a new paint layer for this, or you could just include it on the base and just add a little bit of detail to those. All right, and then I would just come in and kind of clean this up a little bit. You can use the eyedropper to select your color, use the stamp, and we can start to kind of draw over this. You can see this is on this layer. So if we kind of come in and just kind of blend that back in to the body a little bit more and get rid of some of that red. Just kind of make it a little bit more consistent. Okay. All right, so just have a little fun. I would play around with the specularity, try the incandescence to get kind of a lifelike glow to some of the areas on your model, and also use bump map for those cases where you have detail that you it's too fine to really reproduce in the sculpt, but you can create that using a bump map. And at any time, if it's too much or you want to change it, you can modify the visibility, the strength, or the blend mode as well for all of these layers. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just tweak the painting of this a little bit. Let's go ahead in the next lesson and take a look at using PTEX to paint the eyes. So instead of using UVs, we'll just use PTEX. We'll do that next.